Empress Matilda was a formidable contender for the English crown during the turbulent era known as the Anarchy. This bitter civil war, waged between the years 1138 and 1153 across England and Normandy, plunged both realms into a state of near total collapse. Law and order disintegrated, and the land descended into chaos, becoming a place of fear and suffering for its people. So devastating was the conflict that one chronicler lamented, "Christ and his saints were asleep during this period." By the standards of even the most brutal medieval warfare, this was a time of exceptional ruin and despair. At the heart of this storm stood Empress Matilda, a woman of unwavering will, relentless ambition, and royal blood. Although the great lords of England and Normandy swore oaths of fealty to her, when the time came, many did not defend her claim to the throne. This is the story of the first Queen of England, even if history doesn't remember it so. This is the tale of Empress Matilda. Matilda was born to King Henry I of England and his first wife Matilda of Scotland in the year 1102. Her father Henry was the youngest son of William the Conqueror, the Norman Duke who in 1066 had crossed the Channel and seized the English throne, forging an Anglo-Norman empire that extended into Wales. In the wake of this conquest, a new elite emerged, powerful barons who held estates on both sides of the Channel and maintained strong ties to the Kingdom of France, then a fragmented fusion of counties and lordships, barely held together under the nominal rule of the French king. Her mother, Queen Matilda of Scotland, brought with her a lineage of deep symbolic power. She was the daughter of King Malcolm III of Scotland and Margaret of Wessex, a member of the ancient West Saxon royal house, and a direct descendant of Alfred the Great, the revered Anglo-Saxon king who had ruled long before the Norman invasion. For Henry I, this marriage was more than a political alliance. It was a union that bolstered his legitimacy by fusing Norman ambition with the legacy of England's native royal bloodline. Matilda had one legitimate brother, William Adelin, the heir to the throne. Her father, however, had numerous mistresses, fathering around 20 illegitimate children. Little is recorded of Matilda's early years, but it is believed that she remained in the care of her mother, receiving an education that emphasized literacy and religious devotion. Her upbringing was shaped by the presence of prominent nobles at court, including her maternal uncle David, who would later become the King of Scotland, as well as ambitious figures such as her half-brother Robert of Gloucester and her cousin Stephen of Blois. In the year 1108, when Henry I departed for Normandy, he entrusted Matilda and her brother William to the care of Anselm, the Archbishop of Canterbury, a respected cleric favoured by Queen Matilda. While no detailed records of the young Matilda's appearance survive, contemporary chroniclers spoke of her as a woman of remarkable beauty once she reached adulthood. In around the year 1109, Henry V of Germany, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was also the King of Burgundy, Germany and Italy, sent envoys to Normandy with a proposal. He sought the hand of the young Matilda in marriage. He also wrote directly to her mother to press the matter. For King Henry I of England, the match was immensely appealing. His daughter would marry into one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe, enhancing his own standing as the youngest son of a relatively new royal house, and gaining him a powerful ally. On July the 25th in the year 1110, Matilda was crowned Queen of the Germans, and the couple became formally betrothed. Though the age difference was significant, Matilda was just 8 years old, while Henry was 24. By January of the year 1114, when Matilda was 12, she married Henry and formally entered public life in Germany, complete with her own royal household. Despite her youth, Matilda was far from a passive queen. She played an active role in the imperial government. She sponsored royal grants, addressed petitions, and participated in ceremonial duties, demonstrating her command of political affairs. When Henry V was excommunicated by Pope Paschal II, the Emperor and Matilda crossed the Alps into Italy in the year 1116, determined to confront the papacy directly. 1 year later, they advanced on Rome itself. The Pope fled upon their arrival, and in his absence, the papal envoy Maurice Bourdin crowned the couple at St. Peter's Basilica, likely at Easter and again at Pentecost. Through these ceremonies, Matilda laid her claim to the title of Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, a title she would proudly bear for the rest of her life, and one she used on all her seals and charters. In the year 1118, Emperor Henry returned to Germany to quell fresh uprisings and rebellions, leaving Matilda behind as his regent in Italy. Though records of her regency are sparse, it is likely that during this period she gained valuable and practical experience in governance. The marriage, however, produced no children, and in the year 1125, Henry V died after falling ill. At just 23 years of age, Matilda found herself a widow, and her power, once derived from her imperial marriage, was now uncertain. Without an heir, she could not continue as regent of the empire. Her future seemed to lie along one of two paths: to become a nun or find another political marriage. Although proposals from German princes followed, Matilda refused them all and chose to return to Normandy. Her departure was final. She relinquished her estates within the empire and took with her a private treasure of jewels, her imperial regalia, and 2 of her late husband's crowns. Thus ended her chapter as the Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, but her story was far from over. In the year 1120, the political landscape of England was irreversibly altered by a single tragic event: the disaster of the White Ship. Late one night, approximately 300 passengers, including Matilda's brother and the heir to the English throne, William Adelin, along with many high-ranking nobles, boarded a vessel to make the journey from Normandy back to England. Spirits were high, and many aboard the ship had been drinking heavily. As the ship set sail under the cover of darkness, it struck a submerged rock and capsized with terrifying speed. Only one person, a humble butcher, survived the wreck. The rest perished in the waters, among them William, King Henry's only legitimate son, and the sole male heir to the English crown. His death plunged the question of succession into dangerous uncertainty, and the future of the English monarchy was thrown into doubt. At the time, succession laws in Western Europe were far from regulated. In some parts of France, inheritance by the eldest son was the custom, but England followed a more complex tradition. During the Anglo-Saxon period, kings were often chosen by a council known as the Witan. The royal succession could also involve a contest between brothers or other legitimate male relatives. The right to rule was not simply inherited, but claimed and challenged. This ambiguity was compounded by a turbulent history of Anglo-Norman succession over the previous 60 years. William the Conqueror had seized the English throne by force. His sons William Rufus and Robert Curthose fought bitterly over their inheritance, and Henry I himself had secured Normandy only through military might. There had been no peaceful, undisputed transitions of power since the days of the House of Wessex more than a century earlier. Now, with William Adelin lost to the sea, the English crown stood vulnerable once more, unclaimed, uncertain and exposed to the ambitions of those who would seize it. Henry I pondered long and deeply for many years over the question of who should succeed him. The matter weighed heavily upon him, for the future of his kingdom hung in the balance. But at last, in the year 1127, he reached a decision. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Matilda had returned to England by the year 1127, summoned by her father King Henry I, who at last resolved to name her as his heir. Her arrival marked a turning point in the realm's uncertain future. Now, Henry sought to secure his legacy and the stability of both England and Normandy. The Chronicle records this solemn chapter. King Henry held his court at Windsor, and David, the King of Scotland, was present, along with all the great men of England. The king caused the archbishops, bishops, abbots, earls, lords, and all the thanes who were gathered there to swear an oath that they would, after his death, place England and Normandy into the hands of his daughter the princess. This gathering was no ordinary assembly. It was a carefully orchestrated display of royal authority and dynastic intent. The presence of King David of Scotland, Matilda's uncle, as well as the most powerful nobles and churchmen in the land, lent the occasion both legitimacy and gravity. With the eyes of the kingdom upon them, the great lords of England swore fealty to a woman as heir. This was a bold and unprecedented act in a world still dominated by male inheritance. Yet, England had never known a reigning queen. No woman had ever held the crown in her own right, with her word as sovereign law. Though there had been queen consorts and female regents who governed in the absence or youth of kings, the realm had never been ruled by a woman as the sole monarch. Matilda's claim therefore was not only unprecedented, it was revolutionary. And surely in the minds of many great lords, doubt stirred and treachery loomed. The weight of their oaths, though solemnly sworn, hung fragile in the air, and there was little certainty that those vows would endure. With Matilda now restored to her father's court, King Henry I still held considerable influence over her choices and future. Determined to secure the southern borders of Normandy, where his authority had been repeatedly tested since his conquest in the year 1106, he urged Matilda to marry Geoffrey of Anjou, the son of Count Fulk. The match to Henry was a strategic necessity, one that would bind Anjou to the English crown and fortify his hold over the region. Matilda, however, was far from enthusiastic. Once Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, and now the heir to the English throne, she regarded the idea of marrying the son of a mere count as a step beneath her dignity. The disparity in their ages only deepened her reluctance. She was 25, while Geoffrey was still barely 13, still more a boy than a man. Yet, despite her misgivings, Matilda eventually yielded to her father's will, and in the year 1128, the two were wed. The union was strained from the start, and there was little affection between them, and their temperaments proved ill-suited to harmony. Nevertheless, duty prevailed. In March of the year 1133, Matilda gave birth to her first son, whom she named Henry in honour of her father. 2 years later, in the year 1135, King Henry I of England died. With his passing, both England and Normandy were cast into a deep and dangerous uncertainty. The oaths sworn to Matilda would now be tested, and the fate of the realm would hang in the balance. When word of King Henry I's death began to ripple across the realm, Many of those with a claim to the throne found themselves ill-positioned to act swiftly. Matilda and her husband were still in Anjou, far from the heart of English power, but one man was better placed than most to seize the moment: Stephen of Blois. Stephen was in Boulogne when the news reached him. He was the son of Stephen Henry, the Count of Blois, who was an esteemed French noble and a veteran of the Crusades. Stephen's mother was Adela of Normandy, the daughter of William the Conqueror. Thus, Stephen possessed royal blood through his mother's line, giving him a legitimate but politically fragile claim to the English throne. Without delay, Stephen gathered his household knights and crossed the Channel. By the 8th of December, he had likely reached his estates on the outskirts of London. Within days, he began to assert his claim, moving with speed and precision. The people of London welcomed him with open arms, proclaiming him king and cheering his name in the streets. His cause was further strengthened by the support of the Church, particularly from his brother, Henry of Blois, the powerful Bishop of Winchester. Stephen rode to Winchester and secured the royal treasury, a vital symbol of kingly authority. There remained, however, one serious obstacle: the oath Stephen himself had sworn to uphold the succession of the Empress Matilda. But this promise was soon dismissed. Bishop Henry argued persuasively that the oath had been unjustly imposed, and moreover, that the late king had made an error in forcing his court to swear allegiance to a woman. To bolster the claim, Bishop Henry convinced Hugh Bigot, the late king's royal steward, to swear that King Henry had, on his deathbed, renounced Matilda's succession and named Stephen as his true heir. This manoeuvre reshaped the narrative across England. Among nobles and commoners alike, the legitimacy of Stephen's claim took root, and on December the 22nd in the year 1135, Stephen was crowned as the King of England at Westminster Abbey. The crown was his, but peace was not, and a storm was gathering on the horizon. In the early days of Stephen's reign, his rule appeared promising. The royal court glittered with splendour, filled with lavish gatherings where Stephen bestowed generous gifts of land and royal favour upon his supporters. His claim to the throne was further legitimised by the backing of Pope Innocent II, lending divine approval to his kingship. But the illusion of peace was short-lived. Beneath the surface, discontent stirred, and trouble soon emerged. Upon hearing of Henry I's death, and Stephen usurping the throne, King David I of Scotland launched an invasion of northern England in Matilda's name. He seized key strongholds, including Carlisle and Newcastle. At the same time, South Wales rose up in rebellion, and Stephen, despite his efforts, was unable to subdue the region. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Matilda's husband Geoffrey pressed his own campaign. In early 1136, he launched attacks into Normandy, exploiting the fragility of Stephen's continental holdings. Though a brief truce was agreed, it quickly dissolved, and later that same year, Geoffrey returned with renewed force, not to conquer, but to devastate. His forces swept through the Norman countryside, pillaging estates and setting the land ablaze, sowing chaos rather than seeking to govern. The promise of Stephen's early reign was rapidly giving way to a kingdom on the brink, fractured by rebellion, invasion, and the growing shadow of a rival queen. Robert of Gloucester, the illegitimate son of King Henry I and half-brother to Empress Matilda, cast aside his allegiance to King Stephen, setting England on the path to civil war. A formidable figure among the Anglo-Norman nobility, Robert held vast estates in Normandy and wielded considerable influence through the powerful earldom of Gloucester. In the year 1138, Robert openly renounced his loyalty to Stephen and pledged his support to Matilda. His defection sparked a wave of rebellion, particularly in Kent and across the southeast of England. Yet, for a time, Robert remained in Normandy, attempting to persuade Matilda to lead an invasion of England and claim her crown by force. Meanwhile, Stephen sought to secure his northern frontier. He made peace with King David I of Scotland, who had previously invaded in Matilda's name. In a calculated act of diplomacy, Stephen granted King David control over Northumbria and Cumbria in exchange for his homage and the promise of peace along the border. By the year 1139, Geoffrey and Matilda had tightened their grip on Normandy through ruthless campaigns of terror and scorched earth, but their eyes were fixed on a far greater prize, England itself. That year, Matilda, Geoffrey and Robert began preparing for a cross-channel invasion. In the autumn, Matilda landed on the English coast with a small but determined force of 140 knights. She took refuge at Arundel Castle, a stronghold of strategic value, while Robert of Gloucester marched northwest towards Wallingford and Bristol. His aim was to rally support and unite with Miles of Gloucester, a powerful magnate who took this moment to break faith with Stephen and declare for the Empress. Stephen reacted swiftly. He moved south and laid siege to the castle, trapping Matilda within its walls. Yet, Arundel was renowned for its strength, its defences deemed nearly impregnable. In the end, Stephen agreed to a temporary truce, the terms of which remain obscure. What is known is that he allowed Matilda to leave the castle under escort and rejoin Robert in the southwest, a decision some would later call a fatal act of chivalry. Although few major nobles had yet joined Matilda's cause, she now commanded a coherent and defensible region of support. Her territory extended from Gloucester and Bristol, southwest into Devon and Cornwall, west into the Welsh marshes, and eastward to Oxford and Wallingford, dangerously close to London itself. She established her court in Gloucester, where she and her loyal barons began planning their next moves in the growing conflict. Tensions deepened when Ranulph of Chester, a powerful Anglo-Norman noble, grew resentful of Stephen's concession of the north to the Scots. Ranulph believed that he had a rightful claim to Lincoln Castle, which remained in Stephen's hands. Under the pretense of a friendly visit, he seized the castle in a sudden and treacherous attack and renounced his allegiance to Stephen, declaring for Empress Matilda. Stephen, enraged, rallied his forces and marched north with great haste. Upon arrival, he laid siege to Lincoln Castle, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic confrontations of the Civil War that history would come to know as the Anarchy. At the beginning of the year 1141, King Stephen laid siege to Lincoln Castle, determined to reclaim it from the rebellious Ranulph of Chester. Yet, even as he tightened his grip upon the fortress, danger gathered. Robert of Gloucester, half-brother to Empress Matilda and the commander of her forces, advanced towards the king with an army larger and better equipped. When news of Robert's approach reached Stephen, he convened a council of war to weigh his options. Should he stand and fight, or retreat and summon reinforcements? With characteristic boldness, Stephen chose to give battle. Thus, on the 2nd of February in the year 1141, the armies clashed in what would be known as the Battle of Lincoln. Stephen positioned himself at the centre of his army, commanding the heart of the field. The forces of the Empress, however, held the advantage in cavalry. In response, Stephen dismounted many of his knights, forming a resolute wall of infantry, and joined them on foot, a king ready to lead his men into battle. But the tide quickly turned against him. Robert's cavalry outflanked and encircled the royal centre, and Stephen soon found himself surrounded. As the noose tightened, many of his men lost heart and fled the field. Yet, Stephen stood his ground. With sword in hand, he fought fiercely, and when his blade shattered, he seized a borrowed battle axe and continued to fight. Ultimately, the king was overwhelmed, captured by Robert's men. He was taken from the battlefield as a prisoner. His remaining loyalists, refusing to surrender, fought on until they were either slain or forced to yield. Stephen was first taken to Gloucester, where he met face to face with Empress Matilda. From there, he was transferred to Bristol Castle, a stronghold long used for the imprisonment of high-ranking captives. At first, his confinement was relatively humane, but over time, his treatment grew harsher, and he was eventually held in irons. With the king now in her custody, Matilda moved swiftly to claim the throne. She began preparations for her coronation as queen, a bold and unprecedented step. To be crowned, however, she would require both the formal blessing of the church and a coronation at Westminster Abbey, an act that would make her the first woman to wear the crown of England in her own right. Before Easter, Stephen's brother Henry of Blois, acting in his powerful role as the papal legate, summoned a great council at Winchester to consider the church's position in the unfolding crisis. Behind closed doors, Henry had struck a secret bargain with Empress Matilda. In return for delivering the support of the English clergy, she would grant him the authority over the affairs of the church throughout the realm. True to his word, Henry handed over the royal treasury to Matilda, though it was largely depleted, save for Stephen's crown, the most potent symbol of kingship. He then swiftly moved against the king's remaining allies within the church, excommunicating many of Stephen's most steadfast supporters, who refused to pledge loyalty to the Empress. Following Easter, the clergy reconvened in Winchester. In a solemn ceremony rich with symbolism, they formally declared Matilda as the Lady of England and Normandy. With her claim now blessed with both sword and sacrament, Matilda made her way to London to prepare for her coronation planned for June. Yet, as she approached the capital, the ground beneath her began to shift. Though many influential nobles had pledged their support, the citizens of London remained wary. Anxiety took root amongst the city's merchants and guildsmen. Then, on the 24th of June, just days before her coronation, unrest erupted into open revolt. A furious mob surged through the streets, rising up in defiance of the Empress. What should have been her moment of triumph became a scene of chaos. Matilda and her entourage barely escaped with their lives, fleeing the city in haste. Sensing the tides turning, Henry of Blois, the Bishop of Winchester, and the brother to King Stephen, abandoned the Empress's cause and once more declared his support for the king. In swift retaliation, Empress Matilda and her half-brother Robert of Gloucester marched on Winchester in July, laying siege to the bishop's castle. Matilda established her headquarters within the royal castle, preparing to break Henry's resistance. But the bishop was not so easily undone. Rallying his forces, he launched a fierce counterattack, and in a desperate act of defiance, he set fire to large portions of the city. The flames consumed much of Winchester, reducing it to a smouldering ruin. Though Stephen remained imprisoned, the loyalty he inspired among his followers proved formidable. His remaining forces encircled the city, trapping Matilda's army in a tightening blockade. As days turned to weeks, the siege took its toll. With supplies dwindling and the city scorched, Matilda's forces began to suffer from starvation. Realizing the grim reality, Robert of Gloucester resolved to retreat in order to preserve what strength remained. He carefully planned an orderly withdrawal, but the retreat would prove disastrous. As the Empress's host attempted to leave the city, they were set upon by the king's loyalist forces. The vanguard managed to break through the enemy lines and safely escorted Empress Matilda to Gloucester, yet her army was not so fortunate. Much of it was routed and destroyed in the chaos, and few survived the ambush. Worse still, Robert of Gloucester himself was captured in the melee. The loss of her most trusted general and half-brother was a crushing blow to Matilda's cause, one from which her campaign would struggle to recover. The tides of war had once again shifted. The two warring factions ultimately agreed to a fateful exchange. Empress Matilda would release King Stephen from captivity, while Stephen's supporters in turn restored Robert of Gloucester to her cause. Thus, each side reclaimed its leader, and the struggle returned to where it had begun. Yet, the kingdom they now contested was scarred and broken. Much of England lay in ruin, its fields ravaged, its towns burned, and its people weary from years of strife. Thousands of soldiers had perished, noble houses had been torn apart, and the land cried out for peace. But the war, relentless and unresolved, would go on. In the summer of the year 1142, Robert of Gloucester returned to Normandy to aid Geoffrey of Anjou in subduing the last pockets of resistance loyal to King Stephen. Their campaign pressed deep into contested territory, and once their objectives were met, Robert made his way back to England in the autumn. Meanwhile, Empress Matilda found herself under growing pressure. Stephen, determined to end the conflict, launched a bold campaign and soon encircled Oxford, where Matilda had taken refuge. The city, protected by stout walls and the winding waters of the river Isis, had long been considered secure. But Stephen, ever audacious, led a surprise assault, charging through the river and even swimming part of the way. He successfully breached the outer defences, trapping the Empress within Oxford Castle. The fortress was formidable, its walls thick and high, and Stephen chose not to waste his forces on a direct assault. Instead, he settled for a prolonged siege, determined to starve his rival into submission. As the days grew shorter and winter gripped the land, the siege dragged on. Then, on a night just before Christmas, under the cover of snow and silence, Matilda made her escape. Cloaked in white to blend into the frosted landscape, she slipped out of the castle with a small band of loyal knights. They crossed the frozen river on foot and vanished into the night. Left without their leader and no hope of rescue, the garrison at Oxford Castle surrendered the next day. It was a daring escape, one that would pass into legend, as the Lady of England once again eluded her enemies by courage, cunning, and a shroud of winter snow. By the mid-1140s, the bitter war between Empress Matilda and King Stephen had ground into a weary stalemate. Neither side could claim decisive victory, and England, worn thin by years of conflict, languished in uncertainty. The year 1143 began precariously for King Stephen. At Wilton Castle in Hertfordshire, an important gathering point for his royal forces, he found himself besieged by Robert of Gloucester. Pressed hard and outmatched, Stephen attempted a desperate breakout, which culminated in the Battle of Wilton. Once again, the Empress's forces proved formidable. The king's army faltered under the weight of the assault, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed as though Stephen might be taken prisoner for a second time. But fate turned with the loyalty of one man, Stephen's steward, who led a valiant rearguard action. With remarkable courage, he held off the advancing army, buying Stephen just enough time to escape the battlefield. It was a hard-won fight, and though the crown was preserved that day, the conflict showed no sign of ending. The land remained divided, its people exhausted, and its rulers locked in an unrelenting struggle for the soul of the realm. Across the Channel, however, Geoffrey of Anjou was steadily strengthening his position. In 1144, after successfully capturing the Rouen, he was formally recognised as the Duke of Normandy, securing the duchy in Matilda's name and expanding their sphere of influence. In the year 1147, Robert of Gloucester, the Empress's steadfast half-brother and most able commander, passed away peacefully, marking a turning point in the long and bitter struggle for the English crown. The following year, Empress Matilda herself departed England and returned to Normandy, her absence further diminishing the momentum of the war. Around the same time, the call for the Second Crusade echoed across Europe, and many of her remaining supporters took up the cross and left the realm, further weakening her faction's grip on England. The spirit of the conflict began to wane, with no clear victor in sight and years of bloodshed behind them. Many of the realm's barons sought to secure their personal gains through private pacts and peace treaties. England, weary of war, began to grow quiet. In the wake of her withdrawal, Matilda's eldest son Henry slowly stepped into the role of a leader. Eager to assert his claim, the young prince landed in England in the year 1147 with a small band of mercenaries. However, his first expedition was a failure, hindered in part by his lack of funds to pay the troops. Undeterred, Henry returned to Normandy, where Matilda re-established her court in the Rouen. There, she likely made plans for her son Henry's bid for the English throne. In the year 1149, Henry crossed the Channel once again, this time aiming to forge a northern alliance with the powerful Ranulph of Chester. Their intention was to strike at York, perhaps with the assistance from the Scots. But King Stephen moved quickly, marching north to defend the city. The campaign crumbled before it began, and Henry once more returned to Normandy. There, his father declared him duke, solidifying his growing authority. Despite his youth, Henry's charisma and leadership were winning him admiration from across Europe. His fortunes soared higher still in the year 1152, when he shocked the courts of Christendom by marrying Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most sought-after women in Europe and the recently divorced Queen of France. Through this union, Henry became the heir to a vast expanse of land stretching across western France, rivaling even the power of the French crown. In early 1153, Henry landed in England once more, this time with greater resolve. Though Stephen attempted to force him into a decisive battle, the onset of harsh winter made the conflict unsustainable, and the king withdrew to London under a truce. Though his military victories were modest, Henry and his allies now commanded the southwest, the Midlands, and large portions of the north. The civil war, known grimly as the Anarchy, had raged for nearly 15 years. Stephen and Matilda had both secured the crown, and their nobles betrayed them when it suited them. The kingdom had paid the price. Law and order had collapsed. Barons ruled their fiefdoms like petty kings, and vast regions, especially in the north and East Anglia, lay devastated by years of unrelenting conflict. By the early 1150s, even the church and the once ambitious nobility longed for peace. At last, in November of the year 1153, the two weary camps met once more at Winchester. There, a lasting accord was reached. In the great cathedral, Stephen announced the Treaty of Winchester. He acknowledged Henry as his adopted son and rightful successor, and in return, Henry swore homage to Stephen and pledged peace. The treaty's terms were clear. Stephen would retain full royal authority until his death, but would rule in consultation with Henry. Stephen's son William would renounce any claim to the throne in exchange for a guarantee of his lands and titles. Key royal castles would be placed in the custody of neutral guarantors loyal to Henry, and all foreign mercenaries would be dismissed and sent back across the sea. While this agreement brought calm to England, Normandy still simmered with unrest. Baronial discontent lingered, and Matilda, now aging, struggled to fully contain it. But fate intervened once more. In the year 1154, King Stephen died, and Henry Plantagenet was crowned the King of England. For the coronation, he chose the grander of the two imperial crowns that Matilda had brought from the German Empire nearly 3 decades earlier. With her son now crowned as the King of England, the tempests that had long tormented Matilda's life at last began to quiet. Though she never wore the crown in peace, and her rule remained confined to the turbulent years of war, it was through her steadfast will and unyielding resolve that a new royal dynasty was born. Matilda did not end her days as queen, but she became the mother of kings. From her struggle emerged the House of Plantagenet, a line that would shape the destiny of England for centuries to come. Matilda spent her remaining years in Normandy, where she often governed in her son's name, acting as his trusted representative and overseeing affairs of the duchy. In the early years of King Henry II's reign, mother and son issued charters jointly across both England and Normandy, settling the many land disputes that had arisen from the long and bitter conflict. Her wisdom, forged through struggle, was sought by Henry as he navigated the early complexities of his rule, and she remained an influential advisor on matters of state. As age softened the fire of her youth, Matilda turned increasingly toward the church and to the matters of the soul, though she remained active in the governance of Normandy until the end of her life. Those who encountered her in her final years noted a formidable presence. To one chronicler, she seemed out of the stock of tyrants, a judgment perhaps shaped more by the scars of the Anarchy than by the woman herself, whose choices had been born of necessity, ambition, and unrelenting circumstance. Matilda died on the 10th of September in the year 1167, aged around 65 in the Rouen. Her remaining wealth was left to the church, where she was laid to rest with honour. Upon her tomb was inscribed a line that captured the arc of her remarkable life and legacy. Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. Here lies Matilda. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Sites. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.